Welcome to the Biblical Leadership at Work podcast. I am your host, Jason Woodard. This month, we will meet Jason Allen. Jason is a sales rep for a medical technology company where he has worked for 25 years. He is a mechanical engineer by degree, but he has spent time in leadership roles in HR, operations, R&D, and even regulatory affairs. Jason is married with 3 children, including their daughter, who was adopted from Ethiopia. He and his wife, Sarah, are both involved in important and unique ministries, such as providing food for local children in need and medical missions trips to Honduras. But a ministry Jason is especially passionate about is called Pure Desire Ministries, which is helping men and women to overcome the evil of pornography. This is something Jason has struggled with in the past.
So I leaned over in bed one night and said, "Hey, honey, I'm addicted to pornography."
After many years of fighting this addiction, God has used the Pure Desire Ministry to make a difference for he and his family.
There's a pastor out in Oregon that developed the Pure Desire Ministry, which is focused on biblical principles, but also using psychology and principles to be able to break addiction. And it has actually changed my life. It's amazing, life-changing.
Jason talks about his experience being raised in church, but not really having a personal faith in Christ when he was a young man.
I think a lot of that faith was, I'd call it my parents' faith versus my faith. And so I drifted away. When I went to college, I was 2 hours away and, just drifted because it wasn't my faith.
Jason talks about the important leadership principle of mentoring and supporting one another.
The principle of iron sharpening iron back in Proverbs 27:17. So not being able to do this on our own. And a lot of times I think that as leaders, you think you have to, but that's a lie.
Jason shares a question that he asked a new team that he was leading early in his career. And this is a question I think that every leader should ask their team.
What do I need to do to serve you guys to where when it's all said and done, you can look back and say, Jason was a good leader. He was in the top 3 leaders that we've had.
As a sales rep, Jason takes a unique and I think biblical approach to his work.
The field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. Just focus on serving other people and then worrying about the sales as a secondary issue.
So join me now as we get to know Jason Allen. Jason Allen, longtime friend and mentor and brother in Christ, welcome to the podcast. Really appreciate you being here today, sir.
Thanks for having me.
So let's go ahead and dig right into it, Jason, so our audience can get to know you. Let's start with your career background. Then we'll talk a little bit about family and go into your faith in Christ, how you came to know the Lord.
So I went to school at Western Michigan University here in Southwest Michigan, and I have a master's degree in mechanical engineering. I've worked for the same company for 25 years, started out as an intern when I was going through my bachelor's degree at Stryker Corporation, and I've been with them 25 years. So been very blessed to be with them. I started out in manufacturing with Stryker, and I've rotated through research and development, a little stint in regulatory, working with the FDA, human resources, which you don't see a lot of engineers in human resources, and then spent the last 10 years in sales. So I get the opportunity to actually go out into hospitals and attend surgeries, primarily orthopedic surgeries, and see how we can help people get a little bit better.
And when you and I first met, you were a plant manager there at one of their facilities in Kalamazoo. And one of the really fascinating things about Stryker that I think is super cool is, as you said, someone will come with an engineering degree and end up in HR, or someone with an HR background might end up, doing something technical. And it's all about, finding your strengths and using those to excel in your career and to the benefit of the organization. So how are things in sales? So you've been in plant, you've done a lot of that work, you've led really big groups of people, and now you're out working face to face with the customer. What's that experience been like compared to what you've done previously?
I'll kind of back up and talk about how I started that, because I never really would have found myself in sales. So I was sitting down when I was in human resources with our division president, and we were working on a project that was HR related. So it was a lot of fun. But as we finished up what we were going to do on that project, he said, the local sales rep is going to be retiring here, and I want you to think about rotating into the sales and really being able to see our customer firsthand. And at the time, he wanted me to do that for 2 to 3 years and then rotate back in, because at Stryker, for you to be a general manager or really have commercial, you have to have commercial experience. You have to have sales or marketing experience. And so that was the intent. But I've loved it and have not wanted to go back in-house, and have done the leadership in-house, and have just really enjoyed being in front of the customer, attending surgeries, being a small part of allowing people to get healthier and get better and back to life if they've had injuries or they're having deteriorations with a knee replacement or hip replacement, actually being a small part of that. So it's been great. And probably that's where I'm going to finish my career, is just in sales.
One of the things that, and I'm assuming they still do this and try to do it in different ways, is that as an operations person, which I was when I worked at Stryker, we would bring salespeople in, we would bring customers in, and it was I think it was called Customer in You is what they kind of is what they termed it. And it was a really great opportunity to connect the people who are building the product, designing the product, and connect them with people that are being impacted and using the product. And even sometimes I think we had people who had benefited, like patients actually come in and talk about how their lives had been positively impacted by the products that were built.
Yeah, making that connection for everybody. And when we met, I think you were running our machine shop and leading that. And a lot of times people that are, turning and spinning and using CNCs and stuff like that might be making a small component, but actually seeing how that component can save a life or improve a life, I think that's incredibly important. So absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us about your family, Jason. I'd like to learn about your wife, your kids, how long you've been married.
So I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for 22 years, and Sarah runs a nonprofit, which is called Power Up, and it focuses on weekend support, food support for about 400 children in our community. And when we were attending, one of our churches that we attended was doing a mentorship program, and the principal came to us and said, "We love the mentorship that you're doing, but our kids are hungry on the weekends, and it's causing behavioral problems on Fridays or Mondays as they approach," because the school system federally can provide food support throughout the week, but there's no weekend support. And so our church stepped up, and we started with one school and probably about 30 kids. And over the last 10 years, that's grown to many, many schools and about 400 children. So I'm super proud of her and the work that her team does to fill in that gap for kids and food.
That's really interesting nonprofit.
Yeah.
I've not heard of that before. How do you distribute that to the kids? Like, how do you make that connection logistically?
So it's great. It's called a backpack program, and there's actually a lot of them throughout the nation. We kind of learned from a program that was already existing in Vicksburg, which is just south of where we're at. And then we kind of modified it for our schools and that type of thing. But the backpack allows the kids to be able to get the food support confidentially so that they're not bullied when other kids find out that they're, you don't ideally want other kids to find out. And so it's really cool that we actually don't know the identity of the children. It's all confidential. And we allow the principals and the secretaries of the school to decide which kids get it and which kids don't. And so most of the time, the free and reduced lunch program, which is the federal program, there's a lot of kids within the school, and so many more kids than I would have ever thought in our local district were on that program and needed that support. But then our church has generously said, if there's other kids that don't even qualify for the federal program that could benefit from this, you guys know your families better than us, and just take care of them. And the first church that launched this, we had to do fundraising. So that was a big part of Sarah's responsibility, was raising money for this. And now the church we attend right now has just tucked this into their ministry programs and outreach programs, and they fund it fully. And so Sarah doesn't have to do any fundraising. She just focuses on feeding kids, it's such a blessing.
Yeah, that is a huge blessing. And to have the church just reaching out, it's not just the church helping its own, which is important, but it's the church reaching out within the community, saying we're here to love and support our community and physically, right? Not just praying for people in our community and that sort of thing, which is also important, but to say, how can we physically be a blessing to those in our community that aren't even a part of our church, just to show the love of Christ to the broader community?
Yeah, and just one of the philosophies we focused on is we don't want any strings attached. Because we've had pastors say, hey, we need to not only feed people, but worry about their souls. And I think there are, principles in the Bible where we see Jesus doing that is just loving on people and not necessarily, letting those seeds speak for themselves. We've had pastors wanting to put tracts in or invitations to a Christmas program or that type of thing. And we've just said, no, we don't want to push people. We just want to take care of them and let other ministries and other outreaches and other things like that, do their work too. So it's been an amazing ministry, and I'm just proud of how Sarah's grown that ministry to, 20 kids to 400 kids over 10 years, and then just continues to love on the schools and have the relationships with the principals. And she's got about 50 volunteers that help shop for the food and then deliver the bags that go into the backpacks and pick those tubs up and all the logistics behind that. So it's a big part of our family, and it's really, really cool. So if anybody's interested that's local, just look up Power Up, and we have volunteer teams that pack each Wednesday night. We'd love to have you and teach you more about that. Or if you're not in Michigan, there's other ministries that are probably in your area that are focused on food support. So definitely look those up if you're not in Southwest Michigan.
So how about kiddos?
So 3 kiddos. My oldest son is going to be following in my footsteps and attending Western, focused on mechanical engineering. Although he's not focused on medical device, he'd love to work for Tesla or one of the big 3 and do electrical cars is kind of what his passion is right now. So we'll see where the Lord takes him. Middle son is Josh, and he's 1 year behind Jake. So we're doing the college visits right now and trying to figure out where he's going to go. And then our youngest is a daughter, and her name is Meski, which is short for Mescarum. We adopted her from Ethiopia when she was 3 years old, and now she's 14. So it's 11 years have flown by, but she's just finishing up driver's training, which is a horrifying experience that we all go through as parents. But as I mentioned, she's from Ethiopia, and her name means September in Amharic, which is the end of the rainy season in Ethiopia. And it's actually the start of their Orthodox calendar. So they do things very different. They're actually 7 years behind us in their Orthodox calendar. And it starts in September, and all their months are 30 days. So that's just one of the many things that we've learned culturally about Ethiopia. But it's been an absolute blessing to have her in our family and just be a part of that. So
1 in college, 1 getting ready to go to college, and 1 getting ready to drive. That is stressful, costly days, brother. So I'll be praying for you. That's good stuff, though. Yeah, I've got a 16-year-old too. So, and it's our 3rd one that we've put in the driver's seat. So we're a little more used to. Well, you are too. It's your 3rd one, so it's still gets a little nerve-wracking the first several months when you're wondering when they pull out of the driveway. Praying for them to be safe and not drive like you did. If you're like me, you're praying they don't drive like you did. So,
well, it's funny, and you bring this up, but we had an opportunity. So we had a police officer call us. And Sarah didn't answer the phone because it was unknown. But the police officer had our son pulled over, and he was driving, I think, 30 miles over, 20 miles over the speed limit right in front of the police department. And so the police officer said, if I write him, he's going to lose his license and your insurance is going to go through the roof and that type of thing. Are you the type of family that can deal with this on your own? And we said, yes, sir, absolutely. And so we had the opportunity to kind of figure out, what do you do in that parenting moment? So we reached out to some people and kind of combined a couple of different ideas. And so hopefully this could be helpful for anybody that's in this age group that Jason, you and I have found ourselves in with our kiddos. But what we did is we made our son write an apology note to the police officer. And so that was some good humility training. And then we had him actually do research on how much the insurance would have gone up. And then he had to pay that difference for 3 months just to taste a little bit of that increased cost.
Like that.
Yeah. So that was not our own. That was other parents, and just another good example of you don't have to do it all your own. Reach out to other people that have been on this journey before you. And
right.
So, yeah.
So, Jason, tell us about your faith in Christ. I know you love the Lord. I don't know a lot about your testimony and how long you've been a follower of Christ. So very interested to hear about that and what he's done in your life.
Yeah, so I came up from a family that everybody attended the same church. So my mom's family, my dad's family, we were all raised in this small Baptist church in Southeast Michigan, so a metro Detroit area. And so I learned about Christ through attending, I think it was my great-grandfather's funeral, and then asking a lot of questions about where he goes. I was about 7 years old, and my mom led me to Christ in the parking lot of the funeral. Wow. So I love Mom and appreciate just the legacy that each of my dad's family and Mom's family brought. And it was a small enough church where, the pastor knew everything about the family, and it was just one pastor. There was probably a congregation of about 200 people, but if the church was open, we were, the Baptist family that was there.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
Sunday morning, 2 services, Sunday night, Wednesday morning, youth groups, all that type of stuff. So that's where, the foundation that my faith was built on. But I think a lot of that faith was, I'd call it my parents' faith versus my faith. Yep. And so I drifted away. When I went to college, I was 2 hours away and, just drifted because it wasn't my faith. And my parents were asking me if I had found a church here in Kalamazoo, and kind of was annoyed by that at the time, and was dating a girl that was Catholic but wasn't really strong in her faith, and actually got engaged to her. And it was just breaking my parents' heart because they started to see me drift. But this is my prayer right now for my kids and stuff. Like, if you focus on the foundation of faith that you've provided your kids, and get on your knees and pray a lot, you got to trust the Lord that foundation will pay dividends. And so that engagement broke off, thank God, because that would not have been a good marriage, I don't think. And I kind of bottomed out at that point, and I had just graduated with my bachelor's degree. I was already working at Stryker, but from a faith standpoint, and really my life was falling apart. And so I went back to that foundation and started to attend a church here in Kalamazoo and started to get involved. And that's where I really feel like my faith became my own, and started to really dive into some of the things that I needed to work on in my life, and start getting involved really with men's ministry and other guys that saved my life. And so 2 years later, met my wife, and we've been attending church ever since. And it's just been, a big part of our life. So we attend Radiant Church right now. Some of the things I'm involved in, I attend a annual medical missions trip, so trying to bring, my work and faith into helping others. So we go to Honduras and do orthopedic surgery with a team of physicians. So that's been amazing. Just did that the first week of May. And so that was the first time we've been able to do that since the pandemic. So it was great to be able to get back down to Honduras and do surgery for about a week and be a part of the surgical team. And then I also act as a church advisor to a group called Pure Desire Ministries. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But that was an example of one of the areas of my life that I needed to work on and get right. So as my faith became my own, definitely needed to work on some areas. So
on the medical missions, do you go to the same area and work with some of the same people in that area when you go on that trip?
So there's an organization called the Luke Society, and it's Luke in the Bible, Dr. Luke. Yeah. So it's really cool. And the Luke Society focuses on doctors and medical missions throughout the world, but their focus is really on trying to get local doctors in the local countries enough support and help to be able to grow their medical missions locally. And the Honduras work that we were doing was actually American surgeons going down to Honduras and doing surgery. And over 25 years, they started at the local hospital in Gracias, Honduras, and they've now built a surgery center that would rival any of our surgery centers here in the U.S. with all the capabilities and all the technology. It is absolutely gorgeous, but it's been 25 years in the making. And because the Luke Society is really focused on locals and bringing them up, our organization is split off from the Luke Society a couple of years ago and founded its own LLC. So we just go down there, and there's probably about 6 weeks where American surgeons are down doing surgery. And then the remainder of the time, we turn the clinic over to the locals in Honduras, and they can use the facilities and do operations and use our sterilizers and all that type of stuff, because the local hospitals do not have the technology or investments that the clinic does. So, yeah.
My kids have gone to it's a small Christian school here in the community, and in their freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, they do missions trips, and each year it gets a little further away. And the last year it's the Dominican Republic. And when they go, that group goes, the school works with the, similar ministry there in the Dominican Republic and kind of makes a safe landing spot for the kids. And then each year they go out and do some missions work in the same community and work with the same church. We've, supported them financially each year. So to build those relationships, our church before the pandemic also built some relationships with the church in Cuba. So again, just having that, relationship, you go, you spend time together, you support them any way you can, you partner with them, and you definitely grow from them when you see the kind of faith that they have and the challenges that they live with every day that we don't have to, and how they still have a strong faith in the Lord, and in many cases stronger probably than ours in America. Just generally speaking, we get a lot of it spoiled, and it's just a blessing. I've seen so many people go into those environments and come back. Yes, you've gone and helped them for sure, but you come back and you've been greatly challenged in your faith by seeing how other brothers and sisters in Christ live in other parts of the world with much, much less physically. But, they have to rely on the Lord in many ways that we don't think we have to. He's providing those things for us, but it's good for people to do that. It's important to go out and do that when you have the opportunity.
Yeah. And I think you worked with Lonnie Carpenter at Stryker, and one of the things he did is, as his kids reached their senior year in high school, he took them on a missions trip with Dad, and it was just the two of them. And kind of as they started to be, an adult, here, let's focus on missions. Let's go to a developing country and let's serve, but let's talk. And I wasn't able to do this with my oldest son because of the pandemic, but Josh is really interested in going. And so I'm really excited to take him to Honduras and to just experience that. And it sounds like you've done that with your kids as well. So just encourage anybody that's listening to think about, can they serve with their kids? And is there an opportunity to do it internationally? Those are memories and hopefully leadership, foundations like we've talked about that the kids can fall back on as they continue to grow.
It's humbling and it's eye-opening. So let's talk a little bit more about the men's ministry that you brought up. I know you're super passionate about that, so I'd like to hear more about that and let people know what it is. It's an important ministry. It's something that's, I think, not talked about enough in the church. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's called Pure Desire Ministries, and I got connected with this through Radiant Church. And so I got to a point, I was in deacons and elder, roles and that type of thing, and kind of was helping serve the church from a leadership standpoint, but still had work to be done in my own personal life in the areas of pornography, and just a battle that I had inherited from my dad. And it wasn't something I was proud of. It was something that I was pretty transparent with other men as I would sit down with them in men's ministries and talk about. And as I would share my testimony, I was amazed at how many other men would come up to me and say, "Hey, can we grab a cup of coffee? I'd like to talk to you more about that." But kind of struggled along through my faith journey and had read the book Every Man's Battle and was trying to follow those principles, but just continued to struggle. And my wife found out about it. I actually confessed to my wife my second year of marriage, and we had gotten a dating kit that was put on by Focus on the Family. And one of the things in the dating kit said, if you have any unconfessed sin before you start on this journey of focusing on your marriage and that type of thing, confess it to your wife. So I leaned over in bed one night and said, "Hey, honey, I'm addicted to pornography." And that blew up.
That's a big brave step.
Yeah, it was. I just didn't know where that was going to go. And the Lord took us on a journey where we started counseling as a family. But I'll tell you that, again, this is 20 years ago. The church didn't know what to do with that, to be honest with you. And so I attended counseling. There was a Christian counselor that was part of the church. And they were focused on, okay, Jason, you need to read your Bible more. You need to pray more. You need to meet with an accountability partner. And that accountability partner was like this Superman that was an amazing dad, but didn't struggle in this area. And I didn't see any sin in his life. And so as I continued to struggle, the guilt and the shame just drove me into, I did everything they asked me to do, and I still continued to struggle. And so that was just so troubling. So kind of went back underground for a while and honestly lied about it because I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was broken in a way that the church couldn't fix.
Yeah.
And so fast forward, and like I said, I was, elder, deacon, and I felt like, okay, God, if you're going to put all these different opportunities in front of me, I'm just going to continue to serve you, and maybe that'll help this battle. And it didn't. It really kept driving me deeper and deeper into it. And so we went through some struggles as a church, and went through a church split, went through a merger. And through that experience, I became a really angry man, which I think is also involved in this battle with pornography. And
yeah,
so
it's
luckily
hidden sin, right? And it's just in
oh
there.
My gosh,
it's just like inside tearing you up.
Absolutely. And so luckily this ministry existed within Radiant Church, but it's kind of like a hidden ministry that you got to kind of find through networking. So there's an opportunity there. Yeah, exactly. So talk to a pastor. The pastor's like, you need to call Tom. And so I came home and I was still angry. And so I threw Tom's number down on the floor, and the Holy Spirit continued to work on me. So about a month later, I saw it laying on the floor of my office, and I grabbed it and I called Tom, and it changed my life. And so Tom was using the Pure Desire curriculum, and there's a pastor out in Oregon that developed the Pure Desire Ministry, which is focused on biblical principles, but also using psychology and principles to be able to break addiction. And it has actually changed my life. So my wife and I went through counseling with them, and now I've been free for 5 years, which has been an absolute blessing.
That's awesome.
And served them as a church advisor to be able to help other churches launch this ministry. So yeah, if anybody is struggling in this area, just look up puredesire.org and be happy to be able to help them get connected in groups. There's support groups for the spouses that have been betrayed through this sin, and then definitely the people that are struggling with it. And it's amazing, life-changing.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear. And I'm glad that you've been so brave and open about it. It is a highly addictive, super poisonous cancer within, I'd say, the church especially, but in men's lives. And I don't think it's talked about enough. It isn't talked about enough. So that's awesome to hear.
Yeah,
Good.
The statistics are mind-blowing. So 70% of evangelical men struggle with pornography. So 7 out of 10. It's just crazy. And the fastest growing demographic is women. So they're only at 30%, but still, that's a pretty big number. And then we found that 50% of pastors, and I would broaden that out to leaders within the church, struggle with it. And because it's such a secret sin and it's not talked about, that is Satan, loves that, and just it continues to attack people through that. So please reach out. There are so many people. There's a graphic where you think about that statistic. If we color coded 70% of the men, 30% of the women, and 50% of church leaders, in our church, that's almost everybody. And so definitely reach out. I would love to be able to help your church get the program started. If we can be of any help, please let us know.
So let's pivot over to another question I have for you. When you think about leadership, Jason, do you have like a leadership motto? What's your core principle that you go back to as you've been in leadership for quite a long time? You've led a lot of people. So what's your go-to, or what's your kind of your number one motto, I guess, if you have one?
Yeah, I think about the principle of iron sharpening iron back in Proverbs 27:17. So not being able to do this on our own. And a lot of times I think that as leaders, you think you have to, but that's a lie. And I think even in the men's ministry, one of the first principles we do at Pure Desire, and I think it can benefit anybody, is you have to do 3 phone calls a week. And those 3 phone calls, you can't talk about sports or weather or other things that we, love to cover up what's going on. You actually have to talk about where you're at emotionally. And especially for guys, that's not something that we like to do. It's called the FASTER scale, and it was developed by Michael Dye and the Genesis process. But in our groups, we actually have people check in emotionally and say, hey, Woodard, how's it going? Oh, good, Jason, how about you? And then you get into it and say, okay, how are you doing emotionally? And we teach a vocabulary that allows people to be able to communicate effectively where they're at on the emotional scale. But if you're stressed out or the world's kind of spinning up around you, or you're procrastinating or other things like that. It just allows you to connect with another person and just work through that. So I think that applies at work. If you're a leader, reaching out to other leaders, or being, humble enough to be able to reach out to your team and say, I can't figure this out, or I need your help in the faith. In sales, I drive a lot. So I try not to listen to the radio, and I'm making phone calls and just checking in with people, and then also being transparent and just telling people that, hey, if I'm struggling, that's where I'm at, and accepting advice, or even just having somebody pray over you. There's no better feeling than having somebody pray over you. So if you're working with somebody, and instead of saying, I'll pray for you, actually do it like right there.
Yeah, pray with them.
Absolutely, right there. And it takes 30 seconds, whether it's on the phone or in person, and that type of thing. So just that community and iron sharpening iron. I think that is something that has really affected my life and improved it, and trying to pass that down.
I was part of a group that was a mentoring program. It was a nonprofit, but they had a mentoring program, and it was a men's mentoring program, and they had these T-shirts, and it just said, "Mentors, get one, be one." I was like, yeah, that's right, because
pretty simple, right?
It's pretty simple, and it's really effective, and it goes back to what you're saying, and to have that mentor. You and I have a mutual former colleague, and I think we'd both call him friend, and Judd Hoff. And Judd was, from a professional side, the most impactful probably mentor I ever had. And one of the things I knew about Judd is when I went in there to talk to him, and I remember him doing this one time specifically. You start off with, "Hey, how's it going?" "Oh, good," and he called BS on it. And he said, he was like, no, because he knew some things that were going on, and he called me on it, and he was right. And he asked the tough questions. And so that's important. And I've tried to recently be more intentional with mentoring some of the younger men in our church. As I'm getting older, there's more younger men, so of course. And so, but I will say that sometimes I leave those sessions, we'll meet for coffee, and I'm like, did we get very deep? Because we have some pretty superficial conversations. It's important to build a relationship. You're right, to challenge ourselves to not just catch up, mentor, have the one-to-ones, but ask some hard questions and show that we care. And we want to hear how they're doing and see how we can help. So that's good. So again, pivoting off to another question, Jason, what are your spiritual disciplines? Like, talk a little bit about what are the things that you do in your life to, stay close to the Lord, to maintain that relationship with Him.
So as I mentioned before, I'm in sales, so I'm on the road a lot in my car. And so I found that listening to podcasts, and there's probably 3 different churches that I follow their sermons each week. And so I like to listen to that, and then making connections with other guys and praying over them. I've had a group of guys that we've met on Wednesday mornings and prayed each Wednesday morning. And so do that. So those are probably the biggest disciplines. Kind of, I'll be honest with you, during the pandemic, I've really struggled with the community. And that's something that I'm passionate about. So I'm trying to figure that out. We had a small group that had met together for 10 years and it broke up over the pandemic and different views of what was right and wrong in the pandemic and what was going on politically and everything else. And so that's just something I've recently read. And I know you do a lot of reading too, but Andy Stanley just published a book, Not in It to Win It. And it refocuses us on what the early church did to grow. And it's not about pushing your political view or your view on what's right and wrong. It's about loving each other and not ostracizing 50% of the church because you view one way or the other. But that's something I'm really trying to figure out is how, do we get back into community and small groups and
The pandemic brought out some really, really ugly, non-critical to the gospel things in people. So it was unfortunate, but I know some churches people left churches, and it was over some really, really silly things. Definitely not anything that churches should be splitting over, or groups should be splitting over.
This book talks about how Paul reminds us that he became a Jew to the Jews and a Gentile to the Gentiles, and he gave up privileges that he had to be able to connect with other people and love on other people and listen to them. And so I think that's, it doesn't mean that we all have to agree, but you can also ask questions and figure out if a person thinks one way, maybe there's something that happened into their life or an upbringing and that type of thing, and just loving each other and learning from their experiences and, not pushing our views on other people, definitely not without a relationship and that type of thing. So it was just a really good book that I've read and just refocusing on how the early church and how our faith grew and spread. And it's all about love. It's all about others. It's not about you and your views and pushing your views on other people.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, Christians are to advance the kingdom and glorify God. It's about his agenda, right? Not ours. As you look back, Jason, over your time as a leader, especially when you moved into some of your early roles, what were some of the challenges you faced? And then talk a little bit about how did you overcome them? Do you still struggle with those things?
Yeah. So one of the first opportunities I had, it was the first time I was leading a team, and we talked about Stryker, and there's a lot of responsibilities and a lot of rotations that we give. And so I was probably middle 20s, and I had a production team of 50 people. And so there were 4 supervisors, and all the 4 supervisors came in. And I think this was my first week on the job. And they said, "Hey, kid, you're going to screw a lot of the things up, so you need to stop." And I was like, wow, that's a welcome party right there. And they also said, you're going to not be here in 18 months. So why should we even listen to you? And again, there's lots of rotations that happen and that type of thing.
Yep.
And man, I don't know where this came from, hopefully from the Lord, but I said, you know what? You're probably right. But what do I need to do to serve you guys to where when it's all said and done, you can look back and say, Jason was a good leader. He was in the top 3 leaders that we've had. And I think the person had quoted that they had already had 20 different bosses, which is just, crazy.
Yep. And it's probably true there. Yeah. The way they do the way that the system works. Yeah.
But I think that humility of being able to say, you know what, you're right. And not, saying, oh no, I'm going to be here for a long, long time. It's like, you don't control that. I mean, it is probably true that you're going to rotate, but just that humility of saying, what would it take for me to be in your top 3 allowed me to start to have a relationship and conversation with each of those supervisors, learn from them, really use their knowledge. I think sometimes, in this role, I had the college degree and they, were hourly, and a lot of them didn't have the degrees and stuff. And sometimes you can think, well, I've been to school and I know all this type of stuff. Boy, they knew so much more, more than I'll forget, type thing. It just, wow. So just being humble and learning from the people that you're leading, that probably has served me well.
That's funny. You talk about that. When I was managing the machine shop, I had a supervisor we brought in, and I'll never forget this. A couple guys in one of the areas he was managing told him, "We will call you number 20 until you've been here 6 months because you are number 20. And after 6 months, we'll call you by your name." And and then he was like, "Okay, I get it." He was a pretty humble guy. So good. No, that's good advice to come in with that approach. If not, they're going to make your life really, really difficult for a long time. I don't care how experienced you are. You come into a new environment and you have a lot to learn. One of my favorite sayings, I think John Maxwell coined this. It's where I first heard it, was people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right. And this was one I got from Stryker when I worked there, but listen, learn, then lead. It's come in and take that humble approach at first and just keep your mouth shut, pay attention, ask questions before you start giving direction and trying to change things that you don't really know that much about. So
absolutely.
When you look around the world in general, whether it be your sphere of influence, I mean, you interact with people in healthcare, you interact with people in manufacturing. Obviously, you're very involved in ministry. What do you think is like the biggest gap in leadership right now?
I think I go back to what we've already talked about, is that we're just so divided right now, and everybody is focused on their views versus focused on how we can help and love other people. And so I think just being able to find commonality instead of differences, being able to love the person that you're interacting with, whether it be a customer, another person at church or at work or that type of thing. And then being able to dig into their background and their history. We've talked about the uncomfortable conversations, areas that we're struggling in, or transparency and other things like that, and just learning and loving. I think that goes back to the principle you just talked about,
Yeah.
So I think we need to do a lot of that versus focusing on, this is my point of view, and I'm going to make sure by the time I'm done with this conversation, you're at the same place that I am.
Yeah.
I don't think that's how Jesus, treated people.
Mm-mm. No, and I think that I would definitely agree that we get very adamant, again, especially about non-core issues. I mean, I think there's issues that we need to be pretty adamant about, and that really at the end of the day, those are clear, biblical, orthodox issues that is like, and it's not even our opinion, it's scripture that we should say, I'm going to stand firm on these things. But even then, to speak the truth in love, right? Christ came in truth and love. And even when he was flipping tables over, it was because he loved God and he loved the people enough to severely push back on what they were doing, which was pretty egregious in the eyes of God. And it's gotten worse over the last several years, as we talked about, and even it came into the church a lot more than it was before.
It has.
So different question here, a little different topic. How do you honor Christ in your work? So, I mean, when you're out there, you're in sales now, as you said earlier, and interacting with healthcare professionals, and like, how do you glorify the Lord in that line of work, or how do you try to show those principles of your faith?
It's funny. I never would have thought that I'd ever go into sales, and I've always, and I don't hopefully won't offend anybody that's listening, but I don't like buying cars from car salesmen. I don't like buying furniture from furniture salesmen, because the typical person that you're interacting with in those transactions, or at least that I've been, it doesn't feel like that other person is really focused on you and what's best for you. So I've tried to just build relationships, the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Just focus on serving other people, and then worried about the sales as a secondary issue. And I've been very blessed over 10 years that the Lord has taken care of my quota and being able to achieve the goals that Stryker has laid out for me. And in every interaction, trying to do it with ethics, with transparency. I'm not perfect. None of us are. So I just had to learn a little bit of humility. Had a situation that went sideways on me, and some people didn't feel that it was going right. And I wrote an apology note to 3 different people this week and put it in the mail yesterday, just because I wanted them to understand, where I was coming from, and that I was sorry that the things went kind of sideways. So yeah, just trying to be as humble and build relationships the best that you can, and honoring Christ through every interaction, if you can.
So you hand wrote a note, you put something in the mail. Is that
I did.
That's awesome.
I did. Wow. Well, it was tough. It's funny too. Like, I felt like I needed to do it, and I feel like that's the Holy Spirit, right? Like prompting you to do something, and then you talk yourself out of it. And I wrote myself a sticky note. I even asked another sales guy, like, this is the situation. Do you think? And he's like, yeah, you should probably write a little note. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, I want to send you a note. And they're working virtually. So it complicates, like, where do I send the note to? It's so much easier, right, to send an email or a text and stuff. But I think, Jason, we have some similar mentors that have taught us, like, that handwritten note. Oftentimes people say, you never throw away a handwritten note. And I have a file of all the handwritten notes that people have ever written to me in 20, 30 years of my career. And so, the handwritten note, that's something, that a lost art, right?
I have that same file right here in the drawer beside me. And you're right, every handwritten note that I've received at work, I keep in that file, and once in a while we refer back to that. That is very cool. So who are some of your favorite leadership authors? You talked earlier about podcasts. I mean, share with us, who do you like to read? Who do you recommend reading? What are some of the podcasts that you listen to help keep you sharp?
Yeah. So Andy Stanley, and I think some of the other people that you've interviewed have mentioned him. So he is definitely a great one. Another book that I've just actually gone through with another guy, we've been meeting on Tuesday mornings to go through this, guy by the name of Joshua Metcalf, and he's written two books called Burn Your Goals and another one called Chop Wood and Carry Water. And he's a Christian author, but tries to focus you back on, it's really a mental health book, which again, I think we all need, especially what we've been through during the pandemic and that type of thing. But just biblical principles to be able to focus on what you're trying to accomplish. And then the humility, which is the chop wood, carry water piece that his book, just being humble and learning from other people and learning from mentors. So that those two books definitely would recommend.
Burn Your Goals and Chop Wood and Carry Water. All right. What are the podcasts? What are some of your favorite? I'm sure Andy Stanley podcasts or others that you like to listen to.
Yeah, he's got a couple. He's got his normal sermon, then he's got a leadership podcast as well that I listen to. And then, like I said, I just got 2 or 3 churches that I listen to. One's out of Arizona, Christ Church of the Valley. So
okay,
Nate Miersma, you probably remember him from our days.
For sure.
Yeah, a great guy. So when he was out in Arizona, he was actually in sales. So I went out to visit him, to kind of ride along with him to make sure that this is something I wanted to do. And I attended church with him, which again is another principle, like as you travel and stuff, stay on a Sunday and go to church with somebody, right?
Yeah.
Ever since then, I've just been in love with CCV, and I listen to their podcast every single week too. So a great church out of Phoenix, Arizona.
I'll reiterate what you just said about traveling and jumping into church. Last week, my wife and I took a kind of extended weekend anniversary. It was our 29th anniversary. So we went away down to West Virginia, and there's a group of guys I'm on a Facebook group with. And I had said, hey, we're going to be down in this area. Anybody from the area? And there was a pastor of a church. He said, yeah, we're 6 miles from where you guys are going to be staying, come and worship with us Sunday. And it's a Reformed Presbyterian church, and I'm a Baptist, so, but certainly a church I could go to and feel very comfortable with doctrinally. And now I have a connection with this guy. I'm going to keep him on my prayer list and keep that church in my prayers for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Love it.
You mentioned it a little bit earlier with that group of supervisors who said you wouldn't be there after 18 months. But if you think about, working for 30 or 40 years, when you hang your professional hat up, what do you hope and pray people will have remembered about working with you?
So I mentioned that book, Burn Your Goals, and in the first chapter, it actually has you write your obituary. And if you haven't done that exercise, I highly recommend it. So if you were to write what you want your ideal obituary to say, what would it look like? And then what you do is you look through that, and there's a whole bunch of probably things that there's gaps. So what do you want your kids to say once you're gone? What do you want coworkers to say? What do you want your wife, to say about you and that type of thing? And then what are the gaps associated with where you're spending your time and how they would talk about you right now? And so, one of the things that I've adjusted through that exercise is just, man, my kids, when I come home, a lot of times you're stressed out from the day and that type of thing. And they'll want to interact with you, and you're just wanting to, wind down from that day.
Yep.
And my wife and I have recommitted to, if a child enters the room, especially teenagers, because they're going to give you like 30 seconds a day and they're off doing their own thing, but like shutting off the TV, stopping the conversation, looking at the kid and interacting with them. And I think that principle can apply to anybody. Being present and talking to other people and having those relationships. I think that's a legacy that all of us would love to be able to leave behind, is just that they had true relationships and were present with others. I just was talking to my boss, and we both have had recent interactions with some pretty high up leaders where they weren't present. I had lunch with a guy, and he walks in and he's on his phone and for 20 minutes during our lunch, and then sits down, probably gives me 10 minutes, and then he was off. And I was looking forward to this meeting for a long time, and he's a busy guy. And I just think that this is out of character of him, but it's just a lesson for all of us to, if you're going to interact with a person, are you there? Are you present? Because the text, the computers, all the other stuff can wait.
A couple of things I'll say on that. One is I have a young leader. I was first time supervisor on my team who's got I think just a really good career path ahead of him. But one of the things we just talked about, he and I did, was that you have to listen when people are talking to you. And he struggles with that. He's a really high energy guy. And so just that whole being present and listen to what people are saying to you and be present with them is super important. And I think the people that have been the most impactful mentors to me over my career are ones that would set that time aside and actually listen to what you have to say. And that model, that obituary model, I think that a Stephen Covey training that I was in at one time had the same kind of concept. And it was your 75th birthday, what you want, people to say about you. And I think that's a really good practice. I received an MBA through Cornerstone University, and that was like the capstone project. Part of it was writing what's kind of your mission now in life and what do you want to accomplish? It wasn't so much task oriented. It's like, who do you want to be? And how do you plan to glorify God in your professional life, as a husband, as a father, as an employee, as an employer, and all those areas. So yeah, if that's the type of principle that Burn Your Goals book, I would highly recommend people look at that, because sometimes we get and you and I are both doers. We're both action-oriented guys. And so we can just get focused on completing those tasks. And you got to step back sometimes and ask, is the things that I'm doing and spending my time on ultimately working to help me become who I want to, and more importantly, who God has, guided me and given me the strengths to become, and for his glory in the end.
Well, and I just want to commend you for what you're doing here with this podcast. I've loved all the episodes that have already been published, and just think about it here. We're on a Saturday morning. Both of us got up early, but I think you're leading, buddy. And I appreciate everything that you're doing, the people that you've interviewed, and just being able to take the time to be able to serve all of us that are your audience. So thank you for listening to the prompting to do this. I appreciate you so much.
Well, I appreciate that. I feel like I've enjoyed doing it. And really at this point, I've just talked with people who have been a friend and inspiration and a blessing to me over the years, including yourself. So thank you for taking the time today to do this. We go back a long, long ways. And I always remember my time at Stryker is a pivotal time in my career. I was just talking with a co-friend of ours, Tim Hiller, the other day about how, that time at Stryker was eye-opening, stretching, growing, and sometimes painful, but it was really good. And you were a part of that, you and some other men I'll never forget, Rich DeVault and Judd Hoff, and you guys that I think very highly of. So we're good. Again, thanks for the early morning. I pray the best for you and your family and the ministries you're involved in and the work you're doing, man. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, brother.
And thank you for those who have tuned in again this month. If you would like to connect with Jason, I have placed a link to his LinkedIn profile in the podcast notes. I have also included links to many of the resources that he mentioned today. I hope that you will come back next month again as we meet another leader who is working to honor God in the field where he has placed them. Until then, may God accomplish his perfect will in and through you.